America is once again dictating the rules. Putin is shaken by Trump's blows. The markets are in a state of shock, Lukoil is plummeting, and Washington has struck at the Kremlin's wallet. Trump isn't just putting pressure on Putin, he's finishing him off. The Russian economy is bursting at the seams, chaos is erupting on all fronts. Trump's nuclear reset, missiles are flying toward the Kremlin. Lavrov is shouting about conspiracies while the US is celebrating. I'll tell you all about it in a moment. Greetings from Ukraine today. I'm Victoria Panchenko, bringing you the latest events. Trump's oil bomb for the Kremlin. Lukoil is in freefall. The shares of the oil giant are crashing as if after an explosion, down 19% in just 3 weeks. This is the lowest point in the last 2.5 years. Nearly $10 billion have evaporated from the company. Experts are shocked. Lukoil is becoming a symbol of the collapse of Russian business. Investors are fleeing because they fear that after the US strike, the company won't be able to sell its foreign assets without significant losses. The deadline is November 21st. Trump did exactly what the Kremlin feared. He hit them in the wallet. Lukoil is collapsing, the markets are in turmoil, and the Russian economy is coming apart at the seams. US sanctions have become a true oil apocalypse for Moscow. Britain is already seeing the first fruits of the sanctions. Prime Minister Keir Starmer stated that Ukraine's prospects are improving after Trump's oil strike against the Russian Federation. A wave of sanctions has engulfed Moscow. Without holding back, US President Donald Trump has decided to finish off the Kremlin. The US is preparing even tougher sanctions that could break the backbone of the Russian economy and force dictator Vladimir Putin to beg for mercy. US Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker confirmed that Washington is not just putting pressure, it's finishing the job. We
have imposed these sanctions. We plan to ensure their enforcement. Perhaps this is exactly what will help President Putin sit down at the negotiating table and put an end to this war, and at the very least, reach a ceasefire agreement so that we can negotiate a final resolution.
And on top of that, there are also Ukrainian drone sanctions all across Russia. By the end of 2025, Russia could become dependent on fuel imports by up to 60%, 900 kilometers. And repairs to refineries damaged by drones will stretch into the middle of 2026. The fuel crisis in Russia has affected more than 57 regions due to Ukrainian drone attacks on refineries. Fuel sales restrictions and lines at gas stations are plain to see.
The fuel crisis in Russia has even reached oil-rich Tyumen.
Tyumen, did you see this? I pull up to a gas station today, hand over 3,000 hryvnias and say, please fill up my tank for 3,000 hryvnias 95-octane gasoline. And they tell me, here you go, because you can only fill up 30 liters.
Gasoline is running out in more than half of Russia's regions.
Every day, the chaos at Rosneft gas stations continues. There's no gas anywhere except at Rosneft. That's the order. Now you just have to wait in line for a bit.
But as always, the authorities say the situation is under control. There's just a slight increase in prices.
We understand the situation. Prices have definitely gone up recently, but the main thing to keep in mind is that gasoline is available at the gas stations, but...
How should I put it? Maybe it's available somewhere, but people are saying otherwise.
Guys, there's practically no gasoline at any of the gas stations. In this right lane that we see here, it's all a line for the gas station where there's still a chance that gasoline is available. Most likely there is, maybe 100 or 95 octane. And I started filming somewhere in the middle of this sausage line to show you what's going on. There's no gasoline at the gas stations. Give us some gas, guys.
Russia is becoming dependent on fuel imports.
So in the country, gas stations might not even have any gasoline.
Oil refiners won't be able to restore oil processing to previous volumes until June 2026.
Now, essentially, it's payback time for this choice, this rule that if you depend on something or someone, you shouldn't start a conflict with the one you depend on. The West stood behind Ukraine, Russia went to war with Ukraine, and in doing so created a conflict with the West for itself. And now Russia has a problem. It cannot provide what is necessary for the normal functioning not only of its oil refining sector, but of its entire economy.
Russian oil refineries remain outdated in terms of technology and production structure. When some plants stopped operating, the country effectively lost a significant portion of its domestic capacity.
They currently lack significant technological advancements. The absence of certain components leads to a decline in quality. In Russia, even 2 years ago, there was talk about wanting to change automobile standards and essentially revert them to the standards of the 1970s. And now they're saying that due to these strikes and the inability to fully restore everything, they will lower the requirements for fuel production.
Accordingly, the reduction in the overall production of fuel resources will ultimately lead to the fact that, as a direct consequence,
that and nothing more. Cars will start breaking down, and this is not just a simple or isolated problem. Engines, which are the most vital part of any vehicle, will be especially affected, and this will lead to a large number of malfunctions in vehicles. These malfunctions can include issues with performance, reliability, and safety, making it much harder for people to depend on their cars. So this is the reality that is now unfolding in Russia, where more and more vehicles are experiencing these problems. And once again, this is yet another confirmation that when you are technologically behind, and Russia is technologically behind, then perhaps it's not a good idea to go to war with the world.
The gasoline shortage on the domestic market in September reached 20% of consumption. Due to the lack of supply, wholesale gasoline prices have surged since the beginning of the year.
From external fuel supplies, I repeat, in a country without environmental standards.
To at least somewhat contain the crisis on the fuel market, the authorities imposed a complete ban on gasoline exports from Russia, relaxed environmental requirements for refineries, quadrupled fuel purchases from Belarus, and also updated import duties to start supplies from China.
In September, compared to August of 2025, Belarus increased its fuel supplies fourfold. So they were supplying a little before, but now we understand that Belarus is playing a major role. Because Belarus, even though it has the most modern facilities from the perspective of the former USSR, and even though the plants in Mozyr and Novopolotsk are not operating at full capacity, their output still isn't enough to meet Russia's needs. And then there's China. Neither Belarus nor China will supply, let's say, at the prices Russia wants.
By the end of the year, Russia could end up dependent on fuel imports. Besides, in addition,
Belarus and China, fuel supplies to Russia will also come from Azerbaijan. Well, just like with Belarus and with China. Azerbaijan won't do it cheaply either. This will be a national approach, like Russia's. Now, Russia depends on Azerbaijan, and of course, Azerbaijan will try to take advantage of this. That is, there will be certain higher prices here, but Russia has no other option. In other words, Russia is now truly becoming more and more dependent on external suppliers.
Since the beginning of August, UAVs have struck dozens of major oil refineries in Russia, leading to the deepest fuel crisis in the country's history. And the further it goes, the worse the situation will become. Meanwhile, hysteria in the Kremlin is gaining momentum. The summit, which was supposed to be a historic breakthrough, turned into a farce. Let me remind you that Donald Trump canceled his meeting with Putin in Budapest, and now the Kremlin is frantically looking for scapegoats and spinning conspiracies like in a paranoid thriller. The head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Lavrov, in the best traditions of Kremlin surrealism, claimed that Trump allegedly received some backroom reports, after which he canceled the meeting.
Trump was receiving backroom reports, after which the high-level meeting with Russia in Budapest did not take place.
And then it gets even louder. Lavrov pompously declared that Trump supposedly wants to understand Russia's position on Ukraine and even acknowledges that the dearth is a reaction to NATO's expansion. Lavrov couldn't hold back and once again started talking about a Western conspiracy and a new major war against Russia. The Kremlin narrative in all its glory. Europe is sabotaging peace, NATO is preparing for war, and Russia is just a victim. Meanwhile, there's panic in Moscow, Putin's generals are screaming, the US is preparing to deploy missiles in Europe and the Asia-Pacific region. Their flight time to the Kremlin is only 6 to 7 minutes.
At the end of this year, the US plans to adopt the new Dark Eagle medium-range missile system with hypersonic missiles and a firing range of 5,500 kilometers. And in the future, the deployment of this system is anticipated in Europe and the Asia-Pacific region. The flight time of such a missile from the territory of Germany, where this missile system is planned to be deployed to targets in the central part of Russia, is about 6 to 7 minutes.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
And now a new statement from Trump. A nuclear reset is looming. The US, China, and Russia could launch a joint nuclear disarmament plan.
We'll see if it works.
But before everyone could even react to this statement, Trump came out with another round of loud remarks. He declared that the US remains the undisputed nuclear leader of the planet.
I don't even like admitting it, because it's a terrible thing if we ever have to use it. Russia is in second place, China is far behind, but they could catch up to us in 4 to 5 years. That's what they're aiming for. And maybe they will.
Not so long ago, America already resumed nuclear testing. A test launch of an intercontinental missile without a warhead, but with pinpoint accuracy, from California straight to the Marshall Islands. The world once again held its breath in anticipation. Who's next? Moreover, Trump's strike against Russia's allies could become a lever of pressure on Putin, says political expert Andriy Smolly.
If former President Donald Trump strikes Venezuela, Nigeria, or any other country that is friendly or allied with Russia, President Putin or China, it will not be considered a direct move in the ongoing negotiations between these countries. However, it could potentially add yet another argument to the discussion for Trump to use as leverage against Putin.
According to the expert, such actions by the US could break up pro-Russian alliances and show the world. Washington is once again dictating the rules. Such steps could become a tool of geopolitical pressure that would force authoritarian regimes to reconsider their behavior.
The battlefield. Venezuela, Putin, and Trump have become entangled in the struggle for this South American country. And although it is still unofficial and in absentia, the confrontation between Washington and Moscow is intensifying. More on the events surrounding Venezuela and their impact on the war in Ukraine coming up next.
From applause at their meetings and statements about an incredible conversation to what is now essentially a direct confrontation on the territory of a third country. Putin and Trump continue to raise the stakes and are closer than ever to an open war between the US and Russia. And this is not about the Ukrainian front at all, but rather about a war in South America that has not yet begun. Thus, Donald Trump, wanting to finally resolve the issue of drug shipments from Venezuela, sent a military group of 16,000 to its shores. The group includes 8 surface combat ships, a nuclear submarine, and aircraft, including a B-52 strategic bomber and F-35 fighters. In addition, the aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford was sent to the Caribbean basin along with 5 escort ships.
Currently, about 16,000 American military personnel are concentrated in the Caribbean basin, including 6,000 Marines. This number also includes personnel stationed at the base in Puerto Rico, where F-35 military aircraft are currently deployed.
Sensing that things were heating up, the president of Venezuela requested military assistance from Russia, China, and Iran. Only Putin responded. He sent a Russian Il-76 military transport aircraft to Caracas.
It is noted that the operator of the Il-76 is the airline Aviacon Zitotrans, which is under sanctions from the US, Canada, and Ukraine for its ties to Russian military structures, including one-time deliveries of equipment to regions where Wagner PMC mercenaries operate.
Moreover, the flight of the Russian IL took more than 2 days. All this was done to avoid the airspace of Western countries and to prevent a possible inspection of the cargo. What exactly arrived on board still remains unclear. Everything Maduro asked Putin for, he simply isn't capable of providing. Was unable to send due to increasing losses in the war against Ukraine, analysts explain.
Analysts have commented on the situation, noting that the Su-30MK, a fighter jet that Venezuela had previously acquired from Russia, remains a significant part of the country's air force. They also mentioned that the Venezuelan government could benefit from additional financial support at this time, as resources are limited. Furthermore, the analysts pointed out that performing an engine overhaul on these aircraft would be advantageous, helping to maintain their operational effectiveness and reliability.
By the way, after Moscow's support, which was clearly announced in advance, Maduro abruptly changed his rhetoric, shifting from endless calls for peace to an openly militant tone. If they ever dare to come here, they will face the greatest and most formidable shield of our country, the working class, the backbone and true strength of our nation. And a general insurgent revolutionary strike of workers and peasants will be declared in the streets, until power is restored in order to carry out an even more radical revolution. Brothers and sisters, take this as an order. In other words, Venezuela, with Russian weapons, is preparing to fight the Americans. Experts add that many of the modern systems in Maduro's army are simply unknown. Therefore, in the event that high-precision weapons or unmanned systems are used, the personnel will clearly be Russian, which could trigger a direct conflict between the US and Russia. However, who will emerge victorious here is clear even before the clash begins. Russia simply doesn't have any surplus weapons. Everything is being used in Ukraine. There are no reserves and no money either. Therefore, experts say Russian assistance to Venezuela is more of a political gesture from the Kremlin. Once again, it's about bluffing and showing their fake readiness to fight the United States. However, unlike Russia, the US has sent such a contingent with such weaponry to the region that if a war does break out, the outcome will be decided in advance.
Donald Trump's personal top priority is to become the GOAT, greatest of all times, the greatest in world history. In this regard, he is neither a peacemaker nor a warmonger. Where peacekeeping efforts and diplomatic efforts are needed, they won't be there. Where war is necessary to achieve the main goal, to become the greatest statesman of all time, there will be war. All the more so because this does not contradict the peacekeeping concept of peace through strength. In order to achieve peace somewhere, well, sometimes you have to fight at least a little.
But Putin's involvement in this little victorious war of Trump's against Maduro could backfire on the bunker dweller. Emboldened by success and irritated by Moscow's behavior, the American leader might start making impulsive decisions that are extremely advantageous for Ukraine. If there's one thing Donald Trump doesn't lack, it's emotionality. Trump managed to do it. The US president, it seems, persuaded Xi to distance himself from the Kremlin. In South Korea, Trump and Xi signed a historic trade agreement that will increase security and restore balance between the countries. This is a new stage in the strategic partnership between the US and China, and yet another blow to Putin's axis.
Is this a truce or just the calm before the storm? China announced the suspension of an additional 24% tariff on American goods. The easing will last for a year. At the same time, the basic 10% tariff, which was introduced in response to a similar tariff by Trump announced in April, remains in place.
The US is the largest consumer market and China is the largest producer of goods. How does China make money? By supplying its products to the largest markets. And as we believe, that means the US first and foremost.
The decision to update the agreements was made after a meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. Reuters reports. Thanks to this, tariffs of up to 15% on certain types of agricultural products from the US were also lifted. From
an economic point of view, China and the US cannot be, let's say, not just in different camps, but also be mere workers. In fact, they are in different camps because they are competing over which of them is the leading economy.
China's Ministry of Finance stated that it is suspending all tariffs imposed on March 4th on soybeans and other US agricultural products, including corn, wheat, sorghum, and chicken. It was stated that the decision was made in accordance with the consensus reached during economic and trade consultations.
As we consider the ongoing relationship between China and it is important to reflect on the various aspects involved. The United States of America.
The US and China have also agreed to establish direct communication between their armed forces. As stated by Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth, this will help prevent potential conflicts between the countries. Another step China has taken towards the US is refusing to import Russian oil. According to Bloomberg, major companies and small private enterprises in China have canceled nearly half of their oil shipments from Russia after the US imposed sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil in October. And
when the question arises of whom China will choose, Russia or the US, you have to understand a simple thing. The US has a single state, the largest one, California. And California's economy is twice the size of Russia's economy. A single US state has an economy as large as 2 Russian federations. Of course, for China, the US is far more important than Russia.
Putin doesn't want to let go of one of his few remaining partners, so he sent his prime minister to Beijing with greetings. As a result of the negotiations, the parties signed about 10 documents on cooperation in the fields of energy, space, and high technology.
Russia is of interest to China as a supplier of raw materials, a supplier of goods. Russia doesn't really have much choice except to sell everything to China. China understands that Russia depends on it and that Russia will not take any steps against it. And from America's perspective, it's interesting that there is a loss in these areas.
According to the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service, Russia is sinking ever deeper into economic dependence on China. Raw material projects in the Far East and Siberia are turning the region into a resource base for China, while local communities are left out of the promised benefits.
And what do you think? Who is stronger in this confrontation? Trump or Putin? We look forward to your comments. Stay tuned for more, keep up with the main news, and hit the like button under the video. Wishing you peaceful skies above.